Hi everyone, Scott Pyre, Pop Cult fan here. I just came home from the theater. I just saw the new Marvel Thunderbolts film. I saw it with my family, and I'm ready to give my full review of the film with it fresh in my mind. So let's go ahead and get into this. This movie, on a surface level, you can kind of think of it as like Marvel's version of the Suicide Squad. And, there's certain like Valentina's character. You can kind of think of Valentina's character played by Helene from Seinfeld. So you can kind of think of her as like the Amanda Waller of the film in a way. And I think she's an interesting character. She's definitely kind of like the villain, essentially pulling the strings in this film. I think she's an interesting character to follow in a movie like this, and we've seen her in previous films. And I think with the kind of story that they tell here, I think it's like, if you want a Marvel movie that's more earthbound and more, kind of a street level, grounded film, this is definitely for you. Like, if you love the Captain America films, I think you'll also really enjoy this one. This movie is kind of mixing several different characters that we've had in the MCU prior into this as this ragtag group that you wouldn't think would get along, but they kind of have to they kind of have to work together, right? And I think that's a really interesting kind of way of also going into these characters and what they're all going through, because they're all going through something, right? That's another aspect of this movie that I thought was rather fascinating. This movie kind of delved into the psychosis of, how you feel lonely. Like, you're following Yelena's character. This is basically her film. This is Florence Pugh's film in a lot of ways, and I like how it's kind of tackling like mental health issues in a way. And there's moments like where you really get that feel of it being a lot more like just kind of addressing that kind of theme in a MCU film of all MCU films. I think this is one of the darker MCU films and one of the more mature MCU films that we've had in a while. And I think it's a really good film for that, but while also having that same kind of humor that you come to expect with these MCU films. But I thought a lot of the humor worked. Like, I laughed a lot watching this film, but I also teared up a couple times. And I think the music is good too. All the actors, Scene Stealer, Red Guardian, played by David Harbour. I loved his presence in the film. Easily one of my favorite characters in this film, as well as, Yelena, Florence Pugh. I thought she was amazing in her role in this film. And she's always this presence that you really gravitate towards, especially in previous installments that she's been in, especially the Black Widow movie, and even on the Hawkeye TV show on Disney Plus. It's always nice seeing her. And then also, we finally get like the Winter Soldier, Bucky, in a much bigger role ever since Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And it was nice having him in a bigger role, because he had that short cameo in Captain America Brave New World, right? And I liked that we had that cameo in Captain America Brave New World, but it just, it wasn't enough. I wanted more Bucky in the previous Captain America movie, and you definitely get that here. In a way, this is kind of like a Black Widow 2.0. It's like a 2.0 of another of other stuff that we've gotten. And it's a team-up film, so it's this kind of movie where it's not necessarily the Avengers, but who knows, maybe they'll be the next Avengers. Maybe. That's why there's an asterisk in the title of the Thunderbolts film, and the title of the characters being a group. And I think that's really fascinating. And I think going into the other main villain, Bob, I thought he was an interesting character. I'm not going to spoil anything about his character, but in a way, it made me think of another character from another TV show. I would name that character that I'm thinking of and the show that I'm thinking of, but if I do, it could be spoilery, so I'm not gonna say anything about that. But I liked Bob. I think he was an interesting character, and like I was saying about this kind of being a movie addressing mental health, like that is very much kind of prevalent with Bob's character, and I thought that was rather fascinating. And I liked how Yelena was kind of the character that you see trying to get through Bob's kind of mirror or wall in a way, breaking through his kind of state. And that kind of delves into what happens in the third act. I think if did have any flaws, I think the third act does kind of go into that same kind of trope that we see with most MCU films, this big world-ending threat potentially, and then our ragtag group, they have to stop it, right? That's the one thing I will say. Is just that the third act does fall into that same kind of trope that we see most of the time with these kinds of films. But overall, I thought this was actually a really good film. I think it's a kind of a movie that we've had like in phase one. Like, it felt like classic MCU from back in the day, and that's the best thing I could say about this film. It felt like that, and I liked the post-credit scenes too. They were funny and teased what's to come, and it reminded me of post-credit scenes in MCU films of old, like back in phase one, like I was saying. And I think this is definitely a worth watch film. It is a must-see, definitely. I think this movie also, it does something that we haven't had in a while, which I think is rather refreshing. And I think, like I was saying about the humor in this film, I know people have their issues with the constant quippiness of humor in the MCU films, and there is kind of that quippy humor that you come to expect, right? But in this film, it didn't really feel that way. It just felt like genuine humor that kind of helped with the levity of what was going on with a lot of the themes of mental issues. And I liked having that levity. It was a really good, really solid film. I very much enjoyed it, and I am really excited for what's to come. I cannot wait for the next MCU film, the Fantastic Four: First Steps. And if I had to give this movie a grade, before I do give a grade, I think if I really wanted to stress the thing about other issues I might have about this film, I do think that the previous project that we had before this was Daredevil Born Again, season 1 of Daredevil Born Again. And if you're looking for continuity with Easter eggs and references to that show in particular, they don't really do that. This is like a standalone story that doesn't, it doesn't have as much connectivity as you might think it would. It does, but it doesn't have enough Easter eggs to help it feel like a fluid, continuation of the previous project that just came out, Daredevil Born Again, namely. And because of that, because the third act is in New York, the third act of this film is in New York, and what happens at the end of Daredevil Born Again, I'm not gonna mention that, but it kind of, you'd think that after what happened in that first season of Born Again, you'd think that kind of would trickle into this a little bit because it's in New York, but it doesn't. And that's one other issue that I do have. It just doesn't have that kind of fluidity of connective tissue with that previous project that we just had. So that's the only thing I'm going to say about that. But yeah, overall, really solid film. Really loved it. I think this movie, I give it an A minus. That'd be my grade for this movie. So yeah, pretty solid film, very much worth it. I think a lot of MCU film fans will really enjoy this. It's a fun film that also, like I was saying, this kind of being on a service level of Suicide Squad, and might kind of make you think of Guardians of the Galaxy a little bit too, because it's like this ragtag group of characters that are kind of not necessarily good people either. And it was funny because, the character of John Walker, I thought he was a bit of a not so nice guy, and when we first see him at the beginning of the film. And then, I warmed up to his character. I thought he was a pretty solid character who, obviously was not that great of a person before the events of this film. And that's what I like about this kind of story with a group of people that aren't necessarily nice, or kind of just not good people. But I like that about a movie like this, and the kind of story that this is telling. It's really fascinating, and I loved it. I thought it was great. So yeah, A- for Marvelous Thunderbolts. The next film coming out is Fantastic Four: First Steps. Before I close this off, I do want to mention that, in relation to the third act of this movie being in New York, I am actually going to New York this summer with my mom for vacation. I'm going to New York this summer, and I cannot wait for that. It's like near the end of July. I'm going to New York with my mom, and I'm really looking forward to that trip, and I can't wait. So yeah, those are all my thoughts, and I'll catch you guys next time. Take care and have a great May the 4th be with you. Peace.